Councillor Coutinho.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement. I echo his comments on Stormber and thank the emergency services for all they've done to help those in need. And I also want to start by passing on my personal condolences to the Right Honourable Gentleman on the passing of John Prescott. I know he wanted him to lead the Paris Accords in 2015, having admired his work in Kyoto. And I believe he described John as someone who could bash heads together at the time. So I hope, as the Secretary of State's opposite number, I can achieve some of that head bashing that he so clearly valued in John. So, Mr. Speaker, in that vein, the Secretary of State has talked a lot about regaining global leadership, but I fear that he's stuck in 2009. He may not want to acknowledge this, but for the past 14 years, we've been a global leader. We are the only major economy, the only one, to have halved carbon emissions since 1990. In that same time, America's emissions have stayed the same and China's have tripled. However, what we have seen is that countries are not persuaded just because Britain is going further and faster. They're persuaded by prosperity and they're persuaded by living standards. We are 1% of global emissions, and if he continues down the path he set out, I fear that our country will face hardship and there'll be no point in being world leading because nobody will want to follow our lead. He would make us a warning, not an example to others. So let's start with what he announced at COP. The Secretary of State has set out a new target to cut our greenhouse gas emissions by 81% by 2035. However, what we didn't hear in his statement is how much this will cost the British people. The Independent Climate Change Committee say that this target would require people to eat less meat and dairy, take fewer flights, swap their boilers for heat pumps and their petrol cars for EVs at a pace that will require taxes and mandation. Even the chair of the Select Committee has acknowledged people will be forced to change their lives. But the Secretary of State says not to worry. He'll deliver all the savings through energy policy, and those plans will lead to higher growth, cutting bills, creating jobs and strengthening national security. But none of those things are true when it comes to his plans. The Independent Institute for Fiscal Studies has already said that his climate plans won't lead to growth. The National Energy System Operators Report showed that his rush for Clean Power 2030 is going to add eye-watering costs to our energy system. And despite those very expensive costs, it would still leave gas pricing the system around 50% of the time, or would leave the equivalent of millions of homes in the dark waiting for the wind to blow. I don't think that's anybody's idea of energy or national security. But, Mr. Speaker, he doesn't have to take my word for it. The head of offshore wind development at RWE, one of the country's largest wind developers, has warned that the Right Honourable Gentleman's rush to meet his 2030 target will lead to price spikes, with consumers losing out. The chief executive of Octopus has warned about the £6 billion of costs that consumers will have to pay because the Right Honourable Gentleman wants to build renewables without reforming the grid. And the former head of MI6 has warned that the Secretary of State, and I quote, this is worth listening to because it's their former head of MI6. The former head of MI6 has said, and I quote, that the Secretary of State is pursuing completely crazy energy policy when it comes to national security. And when it comes to jobs, his plans to make our energy expensive and unreliable will see jobs fleeing to more polluting countries because it's cheap energy and innovation which matter in the race for jobs. And you only need to ask China, which dominates clean tech supply chains and is the world's largest polluter. That's where billions of pounds of our taxpayers' money will be going to pay for his rush transition, from our country with all the investment it has made into clean power to a country still 60% powered by coal. Low growth, high bills, jobs lost, even blackouts, for more carbon in the atmosphere, Mr. Speaker. That's the opposite of what he's been promising. And in Baku, while he was signing us up to these targets without talking about what they will do for life for British people, he was also signing away billions of pounds of taxpayers' money. He signed us up to a $300 billion annual climate finance target, and I'm afraid it's not credible to say that taxpayers won't have to pay more, and they deserve to know by how much. So can he tell us today what that new target will mean for British taxpayers? And I think, considering the increase in the target, the public will rightly question why countries like Russia, and particularly China, now the world's largest polluter and second largest by historical standards, will not be obliged to pay a penny. I think he tried to insist that they would, but it's very clear that they will not be obliged at all to pay in. Whilst Britain, which has invested billions in cutting its own emissions and is only 1% of global emissions, will have to pay more. Well, he also set out an assessment on the increased reliance on coal-powered Chinese imports for his 2030 zero-carbon plans and what that means for global emissions. Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State is not being honest with the British public. He promised them £300 off their energy bills by 2030, but just weeks ago he whipped his Labour MPs to vote that pledge down. He took away the winter fuel payment despite promising the elderly would be looked after under his energy policy. And he's now saying he can achieve higher climate targets in a way that's zero cost to the public. This is not a recipe for climate leadership, Mr. Speaker. It's a recipe for higher bills and lost jobs, and it will be a disaster for the British public.
Can I just say, just to remind front benches, is 5 minutes. Okay. Secretary of State.
Oh dear, oh dear. Okay, let me deal with questions such as they are, Mr. Speaker. Let's start with our nationally determined contribution announced at COP. Yeah. It's so interesting that she now opposes this, because the 2035 NDC announced by the Prime Minister is exactly the target her government legislated for in 2021 in the 6th carbon budget, which covers 2035, which means she is now opposing, Mr. Speaker, the very same target her government put into law. And she claimed that she was working towards as Secretary of State just a few months ago. And, Mr. Speaker, there is a pattern here. Every week, the Right Honourable Lady takes to Twitter to express her latest outrage about a policy, asking who on earth could support this. And every week, someone pops up in her replies and says politely, "You did, just a few months back." Because this isn't the only one, Mr. Speaker. Last week she came out against the clean heat market mechanism, another policy she proposed. In fact, I have a statement from her from only 8 months ago, where she said it will be coming in, the clean heat market mechanism, in April 2025, exactly what this government is doing. And the truth is, Mr. Speaker, any passing bandwagon, and she'll leap on it, even if it means trashing her record. And let me give her a little lesson about opposition. The job of opposition is to oppose the government, not to oppose yourself. And this is where she has ended up. And so out of the window goes any commitment to climate action, ignoring the fact it's the route to energy security, good jobs and lower bills, ignoring the fact it's backed by business, ignoring the fact that this country has an honourable tradition of a bipartisan consensus. I'm happy to say that the last government proposed some ambitious targets, that COP26 was an important milestone for the world. And the truth is about this is it's not just irresponsible. It's not just crass opportunism. It's also actually what helped take the Conservative Party down to their worst election defeat in 200 years. So it's not going to work for her. Now, let me tell her what the Clean Energy Superpower Mission means for Britain. It means cleaning up our power system so we don't leave the country exposed, as they did, to fossil fuels. It means new jobs in carbon capture and storage as we decarbonise industry and reindustrialise. It means energy efficiency in homes, meaning lower bills, warmer homes and lower emissions. And as for the NISO report that she talks about, I know it's deeply disappointing to her, but we've got an independent report that says the following. First of all, 2030 is achievable. She said it wasn't. It also says it will give us energy security, which she says it wouldn't give us. And it says that it can lead to lower electricity, something she constantly denied. The truth about the Right Honourable Lady is that she's got nothing to say about the. It's basically the Conservative Party is stop the world, I want to get off. Well, stop the world, I want to get off is going to do nothing for the British people. The truth is she's got a lot to learn, and I'm afraid she needs to start reflecting. She needs to start reflecting on where her government went wrong. And it went wrong in many different ways, and she seems to be learning no lessons.